Hello and welcome to the Met Office Deep Dive, our regular in-depth look at all matters meteorological. These are exclusive to the Met Office YouTube channel, so if you enjoy watching them and you want to encourage us to do more of this sort of thing in the future, don't forget to hit subscribe and that way you'll never miss an update. There's an awful lot to cover this week. Meteorological summer is coming to an end. Meteorological autumn is about to begin, although we've had a flavour of autumn during the last week or so. Last week, Storm Lillian was named, making it the most number of named storms in a season since the Met Office started naming storms back in 2015. I'm going to be talking to Will Lang, Met Office expert, in a bit to find out why last year was so stormy and if we can expect more of the same this autumn. But first of all, all about high pressure over the next few days rather than low pressure, although I thought I'd start with this graphic which sums up the rest of meteorological summer very nicely, and it shows effectively more of what we've seen during the last few weeks, and that is much more rainfall towards the northwest, Western Scotland, Cumbria, West Wales, Northern Ireland, and much less rainfall towards the southeast. And this is the amount of rain we're expecting until summer comes to an end, until midnight on Saturday, and some parts of the east and southeast not expecting any rain at all. Some parts of the northwest seeing more than 50 millimetres or so in that period, but much of that actually coming during the rest of Tuesday and into Wednesday, whilst the east and southeast experience a one-day wonder, short-lived waft of warm air from the continent. And the reason behind all of that is this setup. Looking at the bigger picture, we've seen a recurring pattern since around the middle of July. I talked about this in last week's deep dive, so check that out if you want to find out more, if you missed it. But essentially, we've got low pressure between Iceland and Scotland, and we've got the jet stream coming in from the southwest, directing weather fronts and weather systems into northwestern parts of the UK, hence the unsettled, the wet weather here. Whilst further south and east we're closer to an area of high pressure, and in fact as the jet stream over the next 24 hours or so digs a little bit further south to the west of the UK, we're going to draw up this warmth across many southeastern parts of the UK, whilst northwestern areas are cooler behind this weather front and more unsettled. So let's take a look at temperatures first of all, and I'm afraid it is once again all about the east and the southeast. Not necessarily just the southeast, of course. As far north as the Vale of York, we'll get some particularly notable temperatures on Wednesday. It's shown up there 25 in Hull, but some parts of the Vale of York perhaps up to 27, 28 Celsius or so. Somewhere in eastern England likely to see 29 Celsius, small chance of 30 Celsius on Wednesday. There'll be some cloud around. It's not going to be entirely sunny. The sun's not as strong as it is in the middle of summer, of course, so that will mean that temperatures won't be quite as high as we normally expect earlier in the summer in this kind of scenario. Further west, as you can see, temperatures nowhere near as high. Scotland, Northern Ireland, western parts of England and Wales, mid to high teens, perhaps low 20s. And how does that compare with average? This is tomorrow's temperatures. As you can see, 3 to 6 degrees above average for parts of the Midlands into eastern England, whilst there are some blue spots if you squint at western Scotland and Northern Ireland. That would suggest 3 to 6 degrees below average. And the reason behind that is the wet weather we're expecting. Now, it's already a wet day across parts of Cumbria, into Lancashire, into West Wales, the far southwest of Cornwall. That's the cold front that basically divides the cooler northwest with the increasingly warm southeast. But fast forwarding this to Wednesday afternoon, and you can see showery rain across western England and Wales. Still some drier interludes, of course. Scotland and Northern Ireland, heavier showers and some more prolonged rain turning up across western Scotland through the day. Let's put the cloud on, and as you can see, hazy sunshine there across the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. So not entirely blue skies, but very warm nevertheless. Elsewhere, thicker cloud, a lot of rain, especially across western Scotland. Story of the second half of summer. That's been the story of the second half of summer the most unsettled weather hitting western Scotland and Northern Ireland, less unsettled towards the south and the southeast. This northwest-southeast contrast even more enhanced than normal. But that is about to change. If I just fast forward that, what you can see, there's the cold front, by the way. It fizzles out as it pushes east across the UK. And really, it's on Wednesday night that moves east. And while we won't see much rain from it across central and southeastern parts of the country, it will usher in those cooler airflow from the west back to an Atlantic flavour rather than a continental flavour. And actually Thursday, yeah, it's cooler, but you know what? Many places experiencing warm sunny spells and some showers for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, but even here some interludes. Drier compared with Tuesday and Wednesday, even drier again into Friday. Look at that. Skip forward to Friday afternoon. A very nice day indeed across the UK. Virtually everyone's dry. It's not going to be entirely sunny. There is some cloud around, but it's drier compared with the next 24, 36 hours or so. The reason behind that is this high pressure building in. Rewinding a few steps back, and I'll show you where it came from. It's coming from the Azores. Here's the Azores, lovely group of islands. If you ever like to visit, you can get there from Portugal. But they've got a semi-permanent high pressure nearby that sometimes extends towards the UK. We call it the Azores High. That is likely to extend towards the UK during Thursday and then become centred over the UK into Friday, with the jet stream being directed to the north of the country. Although, unlike Wednesday, put the temperatures on, we haven't got a feed of hot air from the continent. So temperatures will be rising as a result of a bit more sunshine around. Not entirely sunny either, but a bit more sunshine, more settled, lighter winds. But we're not tapping into the hot air over the continent at this stage. At this stage, has to be said. Now, moving that forward, and what you can see is a trend through Saturday for that high to push east and become centred over Scandinavia. There is another high that's building once again to the southwest of the UK, but as that high moves into Scandinavia, it is likely to allow temperatures to rise as the winds come in from the continent once again. You can see the warmer colours appearing there across the south once more. But Saturday into the start of Sunday, essentially a mostly fine day. One caveat is that, I'm not sure how well this will show up on the jet stream graphic, but you can see this very amplified jet stream well to the north of the UK there. But there's this other branch of the jet stream which is over the continent, and you can just about make it out there over northern Spain, some of these arrows down here. And there's basically a circulation in the upper atmosphere at the height of the jet stream, known as a vortex, way up there, cut-off vortex, basically, and a low-pressure system way up in the jet stream height of the atmosphere over France. Now, this is where there are some uncertainties for the second half of the weekend. So for the first day of September, we've got high pressure close to the UK, so most places fine with sunny spells. But there are two things that could start to happen, could start to approach the UK. First is this frontal zone to the northwest. That could approach and bring some cloud and some showery rain into the far northwest of the UK. Meanwhile, we've got this upper vortex, this upper area of low pressure over the continent to the south of the UK, and that could start to nudge northwards to bring some humid and potentially thundery weather in from the south. A lot of uncertainty about this because different computer models are saying different things at the moment. It's still, of course, 5 days away. But yeah, if that happened, then it could bring some showers into the south during the second half of the weekend as we start September. Even some thunderstorms make it feel a bit more humid. So those are the two things to watch. Whether more changeable weather will move in from the Atlantic to affect northwestern areas, or whether this vortex to the south will just nudge some thundery rain in to the south during Sunday. And that and the associated uncertainties really continue into the start of next week. Now this is the graph for temperatures and for rainfall for southern parts of the UK, just to highlight the uncertainties really. And what this shows, the red boxes on the top of here are the likely temperatures compared with the average line, which is the red line, for the next 2 weeks. And what it's showing is that on Sunday and into Monday and Tuesday, the boxes get bigger. That indicates more uncertainty, a greater range of likely temperatures, but also the boxes are generally above the red line, so warmer than average, as we potentially import that warmth and humidity from the continent. Likewise, overnight temperatures warmer than average. That's the blue line and the blue boxes. On the top, that's the rainfall, and this is from running the computer model 52 times or so. This is the European model, and what we're seeing is very little rainfall really for the rest of summer. We've already covered that. And then some of these spikes. What you're not seeing is a clear box above the zero line, but you're seeing some spikes, quite high spikes there for the middle of next week. And what that indicates is that many computer models have no rain, but some computer models have a lot of rain. And when that happens, when that's showing up, it's indicating that the rainfall would be convective, it would be showery, so hit and miss, thunderstorms potentially. That's for next week and in the south of the UK. I'm just showing the south of the UK there because it's the most uncertain aspect of the forecast. The rest of the UK likely to keep higher pressure and be mostly fine. And the reason for that is because we're moving into a weather pattern for the first week of September that is coloured in this shade of red. Now, this shows the colouring of different weather patterns and their relative likelihood going out to the next 2 weeks. The first week of September, or the first 10 days of September, is shown here, and it's dominated by this red colour. Red is normally associated with higher pressure closer to the UK. It doesn't always mean dry and settled because it depends where that high pressure is. And this shade of red would normally indicate higher pressure just to the north of the UK, or the northwest, or perhaps the northeast. So higher pressure, yes, but towards the north. That would mean lower pressure perhaps to the south. Maybe over France, but maybe over southern parts of the UK for the first few days of September. To put a bit more detail on that, does that work? There we go. This is the same thing but in map form, and this is showing the most likely pressure anomaly for the UK and Europe here. There's Iceland. For the first week of September, and it is showing those deep red colours to the northwest of the UK, blue over the continent, so lower than normal pressure over the continent, and then higher than normal pressure to the northwest of the UK. And as I say, that would indicate many places settled, but always that chance for the first few days of September, a lot of uncertainty, always that chance of some thundery rain perhaps coming up from the south, a thundery low coming in from France, for example. What does that look like? Well, something a bit like this. This is the most likely weather pattern for Monday, the 2nd of September. This is showing two areas of high pressure actually near the UK. One is to the west and one is over Scandinavia. And in between, we've got low pressure over Iceland, but also low pressure just there over France and Belgium and the Netherlands. And these blue colours here, just indicating that showery rain coming in from the continent, and also a front dangling from that low pressure to bring some showery rain into western Scotland. So those are the two areas to watch, as I say, Sunday to Monday, perhaps Tuesday as well. We're in between areas of high pressure, and there's the potential for some changeable stuff into the far north and northwest, also the potential for some thundery showers into the south of the country. So it's not all plain sailing, even if we do have higher pressure building through the weekend. Then, this is most likely weather pattern for Wednesday the 4th of September. It shows higher pressure, again to the west of the UK, but that low pressure to the south and the low pressure of Iceland have tended to move away. And what we're likely to see, this is what the general suggestion is in the model output, is this high pressure building to the west and northwest of the UK and allowing a cooler airflow, but a lot of fine weather actually across the country. So perhaps our air coming from the west or northwest, areas of cloud and so on, but many places settled. So yeah, first week of September, high pressure moves in, a lot of places will be fine, increasingly warm through the weekend, especially in the south, but just those question marks over whether we get some thundery rain into southern parts through Sunday, Monday, and whether we get some changeable stuff into the northwest throughout that period. But otherwise, much quieter start to autumn compared with how autumn last year ended up. But it's worth remembering that last autumn started off similar to this. The high pressure was in a different place, but we had high pressure in charge during the first 10, 11 days or so last autumn, and we had, as a result, the warmest September on record in the UK. But then, of course, it completely switched around through October, November and December. What did we end up with? We ended up with the most number of named storms that we've named ever since we started naming storms in 2015. And that's why I've asked Will Lang to come back and talk about the reasons behind the number of named storms that we saw last autumn and winter, and whether we can get or expect a repeat through this autumn. So, Will Lang, welcome back to the Met Office Deep Dive. You are, of course, friend of the show. You've been on a few times, and you're also head of warnings here at the Met Office. Plenty of warnings over the last year to keep you busy, certainly associated with storms. Anyway, it's been a particularly stormy year, and the most number of named storms we've seen since we started naming storms back in 2015.
That's right, we got to 12, finishing up with Storm Lillian only just last week. So that's the most we've ever had. So it has been a particularly busy year.
Yeah, and some of these will really stand out for, I don't know how many of these storms stand out for viewers at home, but some of them certainly stand out for me and, of course, for you. Which ones in particular were most notable for you?
Well, the really big ones from my perspective were Storm Babette. Lots of people will remember that from last October. Yeah. Really interesting setup, really messy weather picture. You can see that we've got lots of areas of low pressure. Actually, more than one weather system was involved in Storm Babette. We had other systems running into the back of it, lots and lots of fronts. The whole point was, though, that these weather systems were getting stuck across the UK. You can see a big area blocking high pressure across Scandinavia. The storms were trying to move northeastwards, trying to clear into the North Sea as they normally do, but they couldn't. So they were just getting stuck, and we get these strong easterly winds feeding rain into areas that aren't really used to that heavy rain. So the interesting thing is that storms usually are named because of wind, but also rain can be involved as well, and we factor that into our decision making.
Yeah, and the rain was just incredible for Storm Babette. Here on the left, we've got the total rainfall amount over just 3 days, 18th to the 21st of October. So this is the rainfall amount. Parts of eastern Scotland, more than 200 millimetres in those few days, but also more than 100 millimetres across parts of northern and eastern England. And then, over on this side, we've got how that rainfall amount compared with the seasonal average, because that's in some ways more important because it shows how exceptional this rainfall was.
Huge amounts of rain, and let's also consider where the rain normally falls as well. So what you'd normally look for a season, most of the rain would be in the west. That's where the systems come from. Most of the heaviest rain would be western Scotland, parts of northwest England. But because we had these few days of weather systems coming in, driving the rain in from the east onto the hills in particular, you get this huge build-up of rain, eastern Scotland, parts of the eastern Pennines down into East Anglia. So that's really unusual for that time of year, and that's why it had all of the impacts that it did in terms of flooding.
Yeah, river that runs through Brecon, of course, flooded. Lots of the Trent, rivers down into the Midlands, East Anglia as well, flooding. Really exceptional rainfall, really important and significant impacts as well. Red and amber warnings issued across many parts of the UK. Storm Ciarán, that must stand out.
Really interesting one. In some respects, this had some similarities with the Great Storm of 1987. It didn't have that effect on the UK, and that was pretty close shave. So we had a rapidly developing system moving into the from the Atlantic, really deep, really tightly packed isobars, particularly on the southern flank. That's where the strongest winds are. So if this had been shifted a little bit further north, 50 miles, 100 miles further north, we'd have had some really, really serious damage across southern England, perhaps parts of South Wales. Luckily for us, it passed further south. Unluckily, though, for other areas, the Channel Islands, northern France, where they saw some really horrendously strong winds and some serious damage.
Yeah, we were lucky, weren't we? Narrowly missed similar impacts to the Great Storm, but it just shows here from the shipping forecast. This is the Plymouth Sea area, and talks about violent storm 11, perhaps hurricane force 12 later.
You don't see that very often in the shipping forecast.
No, really, really exceptional winds that just went through the channel. Still, these are the wind gusts, by the way. It might be difficult to see on the screen, I understand, for the audience, but we've got 66 knot wind gusts across some southern English Channel coast. But through the channel there, that's where the strongest sway of the winds hit. Northern France, wind gusts in excess of 100 knots, 115 miles an hour for one or two spots across northern France, and the Channel Islands were really impacted by those winds, weren't they?
So yes, as I said, if it had been further north, if we'd had those winds across southern England, then that would have been really, really nasty. So we got lucky. Our colleagues in the Channel Islands and northern France, not so lucky.
No. Also, Channel Islands hit by a tornado in the midst of the most powerful winds going through as well. Then, moving on to January, and this substantial storm moved across northern parts of the UK. This was Storm Isha.
Almost your more traditional big winter storm. A strong jet stream, a strong storm track across the Atlantic, driving systems across into the northern part of the UK. Normally, when we start to see the strength of the jet stream exceed 200 miles an hour, and it's pointing towards the UK, that sets the alarm bells off, and it tends to spew out these really intense storms, usually across the northern half of the country, and that's what Storm Isha was in this case. We had a red warning out for parts of northeast Scotland for Storm Isha. Yeah,
and that jet stream that you mentioned, the power behind that was due to this temperature contrast across North America. So this is North America, there's Florida, you've got the Great Lakes up here, and this is just showing the temperature numbers. Might be difficult to see on the screen, but we're essentially looking at temperatures below -30 Celsius across northern parts of the USA, and then more like mid-teens further south, and a really significant temperature contrast.
And it's that contrast, even elsewhere in the world, almost halfway around the world, can have big influences on the UK. The temperature contrast here drives the strength of the jet stream out in the Atlantic, and then that becomes a real breeding ground for these storms that spit out across the UK. So that's something we always keep an eye out for.
Yeah, sometimes people ask whether we're going to experience the weather that North America is experiencing, perhaps in a few days' time. And often there is a connection, but it might not necessarily be in the same way that you might expect.
It's a connection. The patterns are connected, and we can spot patterns that emerge to the west of us in particular, and that might influence what we have in the UK in a few days' time.
Yeah, and these were the wind gusts that we saw from Isha, and very strong winds across the UK, with wind gusts into the knots, by the way, into the 50s there, but across southern areas, but into the 70s there for northern parts of the UK, and significantly higher.
Yeah, it was a really big storm. So it was windy everywhere across the UK. Everywhere probably saw some impact in terms of trees down, etc. The strongest winds of all were for that part of northeast Scotland, where they saw the most damage.
Yeah. Now, last week was the week that we got the 12th named storm of the season, which meant that it was officially the most named storm since 2015, when we started naming these storms. Relatively small sample size, of course, but it goes to show how stormy it's been. But it was a different kind of storm once again, wasn't it, last week?
Yeah, we see fewer storms overall in summer, but it doesn't need it to be as windy, because we are more vulnerable to an extent in summer. We've got a lot of people outdoors on holidays, camping, other leisure activities going on. We have other factors as well. A lot of the trees are in full leaf, so if they come down or branches come down from those, then that can cause some serious damage. So it's another set of factors to consider, which means that it doesn't take as much to have a storm in summer as it does in the winter in terms of wind speeds alone. But that doesn't mean that they won't be impactful, as we saw last week.
And this is just a snapshot from the BBC website. It's showing a tent in the air there being flown up from Leeds Festival, stages that were damaged and out of action at Leeds Festival as well. So yeah, this is the significant thing. Storms are named based on impacts rather than wind speed thresholds, which is the sensible thing to do, isn't it? Because naming storms, and our warnings are based on impacts, of course, naming storms is all about making sure people are prepared for those impacts.
Absolutely, Aidan. It's about getting the message across in however where we can, and getting a warning out is something, but also giving it a name gives an extra boost to the communications. People see it on social media. If you're going to a festival, you might think, well, I need to be prepared for that. And that was exactly what we were thinking in the second half of last week when we started to see this storm emerging in the Atlantic. We were thinking, what's going on across northern England where this storm is likely to hit on Friday? And we knew things like the Leeds Festival, other festivals going on, and we take that into consideration, and that was a big part of our decision to name that storm, just to get that message across and hopefully get people to take some action and keep them safe.
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it? Making these storms famous so that more people are aware that it's happening, so that they can be prepared when doing outdoor activities or travelling and so on. The next question is, why was autumn and winter so stormy? I guess there are a few different reasons, but let's bring up this graphic, and it takes a bit of explaining, but basically here's the UK, there's Greenland, there's North America, and what you're seeing is the jet stream anomaly through autumn. Where the colours are blue, the jet stream was stronger than normal. Where the colours are orangey, the jet stream was weaker than normal. And so what this graphic for autumn 2023 is showing is that the jet stream was more powerful than normal to the south of the UK and out in the Atlantic, south of the UK's latitudes. And so we had basically a south-shifted strong jet stream through autumn.
That's right. And so this south-shifted jet, remember we talked about Storm Babette, about something coming up from the south, from the southwest. And actually the fact that the jet is further south means that there's more of an incidence of high pressure to the north of the UK, so that blocking high pressure signal. So that's exactly how we ended up with this situation from Storm Babette, where systems were coming up and then getting stuck and giving us lots of rain.
Storm Ciarán as well, on that south-shifted jet stream.
Absolutely.
That's why it ran through the channel.
Yeah.
Similar storms to that would more likely, in a typical autumn and winter, go to the north of the UK. But
and it was a bit more mixed for the winter as well, wasn't it?
It was. So this is the pressure anomaly for autumn, and it goes to show much lower than normal pressure there. The blue centred over much of the UK, but especially central and southern areas. And yeah, you mentioned the winter. This is the jet stream anomaly for the winter. And it's similar, but it's a bit further north.
Yeah, so things broadly coming up from that direction, but also there's a bit more signal further north as well. So there was a bit more to play for in terms of possible storm tracks. That's where we saw Storm Isha coming across this way, for example, but it did contribute to that overall wet, stormy theme for the autumn and for the winter.
Yeah, and they have the pressure anomaly, so lower than normal pressure again through the autumn and through the winter. Slightly different position for that anomaly further east of the UK, but very similar. So more powerful jet stream through the autumn and winter, and generally to the south of the UK. Yeah. More low pressure systems, deeper low pressure systems, all of that stuff. The next question people watching this will be asking is, why did we have that setup through autumn and winter?
There are so many factors, but there are the main factors we were considering this time last year when we talked on the deep dive, things like El Nino and La Nina. So that's about ocean temperatures in the Pacific, but again, knock-on effects around the globe. Last year we were in an El Nino situation that can favour some wetter conditions in autumn and in the first part of winter in particular, so that was one of our considerations. Another one is that we had really, really high sea surface temperatures around the UK. You remember people talking about marine heat waves at the time. And that also can provide that extra energy for storm development that we saw last autumn and winter.
Yeah, so lots of these factors coming together, leading to wetter, windier conditions, more powerful jet stream through the autumn and winter. We've got different conditions coming together potentially for this autumn. Of course, we've just issued the seasonal forecast for the autumn. Here it is. If you could talk us through this, what's the seasonal forecast for this autumn?
So this always takes a bit of explaining. So I'm sure viewers will have seen this before, some of you at least, but let's go through it again. What we do is we break down each of these categories, temperature, precipitation and wind speed, into 3 categories. So that's below normal, near average and above normal. And we assign those probabilities. And the normal probability of this happening should be, in each category, 20%, 60%, 20%, by definition.
Yeah.
So if we see anything different from that, it indicates that the seasonal forecast is going for something shifted in a little bit of a different way.
Okay.
So what this is telling us for September and October and November, which is the meteorological autumn, is that there is a shift above 20%. It's gone to 40% for warm. That's actually fairly standard because that's what we're seeing through climate change. Most of the seasons that we see will be warmer than they were historically. Mm-hmm. Interesting ones, precipitation, not 20%, 35%. So that's skewed towards the wet side of things for the UK as a whole. Also, the windy side of things. So again, not 20% for windy, but 35%. So overall, for the UK as a whole, it's suggesting that that season has an increased probability of being wetter and windier than average. Doesn't mean it will be, it just means that the odds are shifted a bit in favour of those outcomes.
Yeah, and I guess it's still a 55% that it's near average. It's still a 10% chance that it's dry
it could
and
still be
cold.
dry, cool and calm. And we're not ruling that out. This is like assessing the odds of a sports team at the beginning of a football season, for example. Lots of things can change, but this is just the initial indications based on the models and the other drivers that we're looking at. However, based on our assessment, our expert assessment of what might be going on, near average is still most likely, but there is a significant shift towards the wetter and windier conditions.
What are those factors that you're looking at to inform this? Are we looking at El Nino again?
Well, El Nino has waned really, and we're in what we call a neutral state at the moment. There's not too much going on in the Pacific in terms of the contrasts of temperatures. What it looks like will be happening in the next few months is a developing La Nina situation, but it's actually not being a big player in the UK weather yet. That might come later on in the winter. We'll keep a close eye on that. So there's not a big driver from what's going on in the Pacific. Sea surface temperatures a bit above normal, not so much as last year, so that's a little bit of a factor. So there's not too much to go on in terms of the large-scale driver patterns. What we do is use our models, though, to give broad indications of what the pressure patterns might be across the UK. And this is a pressure anomaly chart for the next 3 months, so this is a forecast. But what I'd suggest we do is compare that with that graphic that you showed before of the seasonal average pressure and where we saw low pressure across the UK for autumn and winter last year. Now the blue is the lower pressure than expected. The take-home message is that to the north and northeast of the UK we're likely to see higher pressure.
Or lower pressure.
Sorry, lower pressure, higher pressure to the west of the UK out in the Atlantic. So that's a different pattern to what we were seeing at this time last year. It is shifted further north. It does suggest a fairly mobile setup with systems coming in off the Atlantic, still a fairly strong jet stream at times, but things more likely to come across the northern half of the UK rather than getting stuck across the south and east like they did last year.
So a bit more like climatology with westerlies, low pressure, more towards the north.
A bit more like you'd expect. In fact, a little bit more than you'd expect from a normal setup.
An enhanced kind of climatology.
An enhanced climatology. So it'll probably be wet in the usual places, north and west, perhaps a bit wetter than normal. Further south you go, it's less conclusive. It might be higher pressure that's dominating there. It's very much on the boundary of things. So, you know, if there's anywhere going to be drier, it's probably likely to be the southern part of the UK.
Yeah, and it's this gradient, isn't it, that we're looking at? That's lower pressure to the north and east, higher pressure there, and that gradient.
And it's really subtle, and you can see that this is trying to cover the whole of the 3 months, and this is just trying to infer this broad pattern. So there'll be lots of other things going on in the interim. There will be times when the winds are coming from this direction and the jet streams up here, etc. So this is really blurring everything together to look at the season as a whole, but this seems to be the prevailing pattern.
Yeah, and so this is the most likely, but it's not certainly going to be the only pattern through the next 3 months, nor is it necessarily guaranteed to be the overall pattern for 3 months.
Absolutely not. Everything is still on the table. And in fact, the UK autumn and the winter is probably characterised by its variability more than anything else.
Yeah, week to week, place to place. And also, as we've seen over the last few years, of course, from year to year, we had the stormiest season since we started naming storms in 2015 last year before, we only had 2 storms, and they happened in the summer, didn't they?
They were both in the summer, both in August.
Yeah.
There's no real pattern there. You know, we're not seeing anything hugely significant because of climate change or any other long-term trends. So there's just a lot and lot of variability in how the UK autumn and winter plays out, and then the number of storms that we get.
Yeah, and I guess the fact that it's so variable from year to year is because we're so subject to those small changes in the position of the jet stream that we've seen in the last few years. If it's 100 miles to the south, it's very stormy. If it's 100 miles to the north, much less stormy.
And as we always say, that's due to our privileged position sticking out into the Atlantic, but also close to the European air mass. So we've talked about winds coming in from the Atlantic. As we get into winter, when the winds come from the other direction, that's where we get our cold problems. So we can be subject to all kinds of weather. Everything is still on the table for the UK over the next 6 months.
We are definitely in a privileged position, and it makes our jobs interesting as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely keeps us on our toes.
Well, thank you for joining us again, Will Lang, and that's all we've got for you this week on the Met Office Deep Dive. Don't forget to hit subscribe, click like, send us a comment, a question. If you've got a question for Will, I'll pass it on and see if we can get an answer. But yeah, that's it for this week. Join us again next week. Bye-bye.